Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is June the 26th, 2024. It has been 3,803 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 127 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years, 4 months and 3 days since Russia expanded its sphere of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands North, South and East of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. There are only small changes from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, that's okay, I won't even know. 1. In our assessment, Russia will continue to make tactical gains during its current offensive, but a lack of mobility, low morale, poor battlefield medicine and logistics issues make it unlikely that there will be significant breaches of existing Ukrainian defensive lines. 2. Our earlier assessment that Ukrainian ammunition shortages would be solved by the end of June was accurate. 3. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 4. Russia is setting conditions to commit further acts of aggression in Europe. 5. Russia's sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has destroyed over 80% of its combined thermal and power plant capacity, is a continuation of Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 2 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court on March 5th. 6. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs is encouraging escalation. 7. Autocrat Putin is continuing the largest purge of the Russian Ministry of Defense led by the FSB since Joseph Stalin's 1936 to 1938 purge. 8. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine. Yesterday, Russian attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure wounded at least 16 and killed 3. In the Kharkiv Oblast, the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, bombed the village of Bobrivka, wounding 4 civilians aged 40 to 87, with 2 in hospital. In the Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces shelled the village of Zolota Niva, killing 1 civilian. The VKS bombed Toretsk 6 times, wounding 4, Kurakhove once, wounding 3, and Velika Novosilka once, killing 1. Drones struck Zalizne and Mykolaiivka, wounding 3. Also in Zalizne, Russian forces fired 7 artillery shells at volunteers who were delivering humanitarian aid to residents. No one was injured in the attack. In the settlement of Shcherbinivka, the White Angels evacuated a family of 4, including 3 children aged 5 to 16, after an unexploded Fab 500 UMPK bomb detonated near their home. In the Kherson Oblast, Russia attacked 13 villages and settlements and the city of Kherson, wounding 2. Here is today's action report. On Monday, Russia carried out 170 assaults, tying their previous record set in February 2023. On Tuesday evening, 121 attacks had been recorded. Through June the 24th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks climbed to 148. Despite the number of attacks, Russian forces only advanced in one area of operation, and Ukrainian forces improved their positions in the eastern part of Krasnohorivka. Ukrainian artillery units are reporting that the ammunition shortages have ended, which is one of the reasons that Russian forces can only make small tactical gains despite the record level of fighting. Russian sources released 2 high-resolution videos from security cameras showing the moment that Uchkuivka beach in Sevastopol was hit. The 44-second video shows the incident from 2 angles, which we analyzed. Our first conclusion is that the impacts were not caused by exploding M47 submunitions from an ATACMS missile. The MGM-140 ATACMS M39 Block 1 missile carries 950 M74 submunitions weighing 590 grams each. These anti-personnel bomblets have a secondary incendiary charge, a thin steel cover, and tungsten fins. Each submunition has a lethality radius of 15 meters, which is 50% greater than a hand grenade. The bomblets are armed by their high-speed spinning motion and impact-fused. In the video, there are multiple strikes less than 3 meters from large groups of people with no explosions and no lethal injuries. The videos also show that most of the debris landed in the water, as reported by Russian state media. The dispersal pattern does not match the M39 ATACMS missile, which spreads the bomblets in a 360-meter wide circular pattern. The splash pattern in the video, no pun intended, is irregular and rectangular. Additionally, there are only dozens of impacts, leaving hundreds of M74 bomblets unaccounted for. Russian officials have still not produced a single credible picture of an unexploded bomblet found at the site or recovered from the shore. As with all of our investigations into alleged war crimes, an authoritative conclusion would require an on-site inspection by a team of experts, interviews with eyewitnesses, and cooperation with local officials. Based on the first videos, the new evidence, the initial reports by Russian officials, and eyewitness accounts, the new allegations from Russia that this was an intentional attack planned by the United States are unsubstantiated. Moscow's repeated propaganda about imminent victory and superior weapons directed at its citizenry created a false sense of security, making it impossible for individuals to make a proper threat assessment. In conclusion, this was an unfortunate accident caused by Russian air defense shooting down a missile and the debris landing in the crowded beach area. Russian officials who continue to encourage their citizens to vacation in a war zone contributed to the incident. Due to the proximity of Uchkuivka beach to a military airfield, even if Russian officials want to create an illusion of normalcy, the area should not have been open to the public. Beyond a beach closure, many injuries could have been prevented if air raid sirens had been activated and adequate bomb shelters had been available. Subscribers get access to the video and a more in-depth analysis. There's more information in the podcast description. Now let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, we begin in the Lipty-Vovchansk area of operation, or AO. Fighting continued in Vovchansk with no significant change in the situation. A Russian assault in the direction of Tykhe was repulsed. Fighting also continued north of Lipty in the village of Hluboka. In the Belgorod region of Russia, Ukraine destroyed a second Panzer S-1 air defense system on the eastern edge of Borisovka. Hospitals in Belgorod are overflowing with wounded Russian soldiers who are lined side by side and placed in hallways and chairs. In Moshchonaya, a school that was being used by Russian troops as barracks was destroyed after being struck by a one-way drone. Belgorod region governor Vyacheslav Gladkov reported one soldier was killed and another wounded. In the border villages of Belgorod, residents have started flying Ukrainian flags and placing them on their roofs to indicate they are civilian-occupied. Governor Gladkov reportedly instructed the Ministry of Internal Affairs not to take action. In the Kupiansk AO, Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defensive lines east of Sinkivka and made tactical gains from Virshana in the direction of Petropavlivka. The geolocated video shows Russian troops arriving in a total tank and occupying the well-established Ukrainian defensive positions. Fighting continued east of Stepova, Novoselivka and Peshchane with no change in the situation. In the Svatovo AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their attacks east of Stelmachivka. Ukrainian defenses near the hamlet of Andriivka were probed, with Russian forces suffering losses and retreating to their existing defensive positions. Fighting west of occupied Serhiivka continued, with Russian forces attempting to climb the ridge at Nadia to advance in the direction of Kopanke. In the Kremenaya, Russian forces reduced the number of their attacks, continuing to pressure Ukrainian defensive lines east of Makiivka. In the Siversk AO of the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their attacks east and southeast of Bilogorivka, suffered losses and returned to their defensive positions. Let's talk about the Donbass and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Russian forces carried out 7 assaults in the Siversk AO of the Donetsk Oblast. 4 of the attacks were in the direction of Verkhnyokamyansk from Zolotarivka, where the situation has become difficult. A company of mechanized infantry tried to break through Ukrainian defensive lines near Spirne, with 5 armored vehicles destroyed and 3 suffering mobility kills. To the southeast, fighting continued near Vyemka and in the area of Rozdolivka. In the Konstantinivka AO, Russian forces repeatedly attacked the eastern edges of the canal district of Chasiv Yar and continued to be unable to advance. Russian attempts to advance from the western edge of Ivanivske and southeast of Andriivka were unsuccessful. In the Toretsk-New York AO, heavy fighting continued on the eastern edge of Toretsk. A Russian video showed Ukrainian positions south of Shumy under attack. Based on the geolocation, we moved the line of conflict between Shumy and Pivdenne back to the Minsk II border. In the southwestern part of the Donetsk Oblast, the heaviest fighting continues to be in the Avdiivka AO, where Russian forces carried out at least 39 assaults, with no new gains recorded. Heavy fighting continued on the western edge of Novoalexandrivka, in the direction of Vozdvizhenka, Yevgenivka and Novoselivka Persha, and in the eastern part of Sokil. Ukrainian and Russian sources reported fighting continued in the area of Yasnobrodivka, and Russian mercenary Melblogovo Gonzo reported fighting continued on the outskirts of Karlivka. In the Vuhledar AO, Russian propagandist Alexander Sladkov shared a drone video of the ongoing fighting in Krasnohorivka, which revealed Ukraine had made new gains in the eastern part of the settlement, or earlier Russian advances were overstated. A Ukrainian armored vehicle was destroyed between the dachas and the cemetery, and new Russian airstrikes hit the apartment blocks in the eastern part of the settlement, confirming the area is still under Ukrainian control. Based on the new intelligence, we adjusted the line of conflict and the grey area. Fighting continued on the eastern edge of Georgiivka and in Paraskoviivka, with no change in the situation. In the Vremivka AO, Ukrainian forces repulsed another series of Russian attacks in the southern part of Urozhaina. Ukraine attacked the railroad infrastructure at the main train station in the Russian city of Belgorod, causing major damage to the tracks.
Сегодня вот у нас взорвали склад боеприпасов. Взрывы были, 100 часов ночи до сих пор.
An ammunition depot in the village of Olkhovatka in the Voronezh region was hit by 2 Ukrainian drones, causing a large explosion. Artillery ammunition cooked off for over 7 hours. United States state media agency Radio Liberty shared satellite images from Planet Labs confirming the ammunition depot was on fire. Voronezh region governor Alexander Gusev declared a state of emergency, and residents were advised to stay in their homes. In the Republic of Dagestan, police officers were ambushed by Islamic terrorists in Makhachkala, with gunfire erupting near University Square. 2 gunmen reportedly opened fire on police officers as they approached their vehicle. Russian officials confirmed that Magomed Amarov was dismissed as the head of the Sergakalinsky district of Dagestan and has been arrested. Amarov has been charged with petty hooliganism, but prosecutors are expected to charge Amarov with aiding terrorists, which carries up to a 20-year sentence. Both of his sons were killed during the June 23rd terror attack in Makhachkala, and Russian officials claim that Amarov confessed to knowing about their involvement. Fire started in the Platan Research Institute in Fryazino, a suburb of Moscow. The Ministry of Emergency Situations said the building is unstable and on the brink of collapse, so firefighting efforts will only be conducted from the outside.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is my Theaterwide update. Ukraine held its first intergovernmental conference for European Union accession, officially kicking off the 3-step process. The first official step began almost 11 years after Euromaidan. Massive protests swept across Ukraine, calling for EU integration and government reform, which were violently suppressed by Russian assets. Inclusion into the 27-nation economic bloc is still years away. The EU Council approved a draft security agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. The details of the bilateral security agreement were not announced, but it could be signed as soon as the end of the week. Spain sent a second batch of PAC-2 interceptors for the Patriot air defense system to Ukraine. This is the second batch of anti-aircraft missiles provided by Spain in 2024. In our War Crimes and Human Rights section, I sometimes discuss and provide detailed information about human rights abuses, violence, torture, harm to children, and gender-based violence. Today's report does not contain any graphic details. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for former Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu and Chief of the General Staff and Commander of all Russian forces in Ukraine Valery Gerasimov. Both are accused of international crimes committed between October 10, 2022 and March 9, 2023. The court declared that both are, quote, allegedly responsible for the war crime of directing attacks at civilian objects and the war crime of causing excessive incidental harm to civilians or damage to civilian objects, and the crime against humanity of inhumane acts. The charges stem from Russia's systematic destruction of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The United States Department of State released its 2024 Trafficking in Persons report, adding Belarus and Russia to the list of nations that are state sponsors of human trafficking. The European Court of Human Rights issued its verdict for the case Ukraine versus Russia, finding that in occupied Crimea, Russia has systematically violated the human rights of ethnic Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians living under occupation. Ukraine accused Russia of 11 human rights violations starting in February 2014, when Crimea was invaded and illegally occupied. The 346-page filing outlined how Russia has persecuted Ukrainians for their political positions and pro-Ukrainian activity. The court found that Russian occupiers suppressed the work of Ukrainian news and media and used disappearances, illegal detention, maltreatment, and forced passportization to control the population. Additionally, schools were closed, the teaching of Ukrainian was banned, and religion, language, and free expression were suppressed. Russian mail blogger Kirill Fedorov published an interview with a Russian Ka-52 helicopter pilot who boasted that he had a woman arrested and tortured because she said, quote, "Good evening, tap your card," in Ukrainian. Quote, "I asked her, why are you talking to me in Ukrainian? She is silent. I asked again why she spoke to me in Ukrainian. I want it that way," she answers. "We took her to the nearest checkpoint, handcuffed, and they put her in the basement." Unquote. The command of the support forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that in May there were 715 documented cases of Russia using prohibited chemical weapons on the battlefield, a 38% increase from April. Most of the incidents involved tear gas deployed by K-51 crowd control grenades. In December 2024, Russia introduced the drone-delivered RGVO gas grenade with a metal casing that deploys chloropicrin. On June 7th, the US State Department accused Russia of having a, quote, "active chemical weapons program" in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention.
Слава Україні! Слава Україні! Слава Україні!
Yesterday, 90 Ukrainian POWs were exchanged for 90 Russians. The repatriated Ukrainian soldiers include 52 Azovstal defenders, 7 soldiers captured in Mariupol, and 5 who were guarding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Finally, in economic news, the latest round of sanctions against Russia is testing the central bank's ability to keep inflation from running out of control. The official inflation rate in May rose to 8.3%. Russia's official inflation rate has more than doubled in the last 12 months, and the actual rate is believed to be significantly higher than published figures. The Consumer Price Index reached the highest level ever recorded, and food inflation rose 9.1%. The Russian version of the Moscow Times reported that Rosbank predicted the Central Bank of Russia would implement a 200 basis points increase in July, raising the lending rate to 18%. German Gref, the CEO of state-run Sberbank, warned that Russia's growth was fragile because it relies on government spending to keep pushing wages and consumer spending up versus increased investment and gains in worker productivity. Everything is going to plan. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.